rises for the win from 29 from the right hash. Koo's kick is good. Here is Durant for the win. James for the win. It's gone. LeBron James at the buzzer.
All right, let's talk about it.
Let's do it.
We're talking about. Well,
Sure,
let me start out by saying I respect my elders.
Yeah, elders.
I do. I respect them. They have experience. They have wisdom. However,
Man, we talked the other day, man. A lot of old people just don't know sports, bro.
okay, I didn't go that far.
Yeah.
I didn't go that far.
I think we would talk about in the realm
No,
of
I get
sports.
it. No, I get it.
Oh, okay.
But still, my statement still remains true. But okay.
You can stand on that statement.
Let's continue.
I'm still on my disclaimer. I respect my elders. I respect their wisdom and everything they've gone through. However, they can be quite delusional. Recently, Charles Oakley said that Giannis Antetokounmpo,
Two-time MVP.
one-time Defensive Player of the Year, Finals MVP, 50-point game in a closeout NBA Finals,
Ooh.
3 40-point games in that NBA Finals. He said that Giannis would come off the bench in his era.
What is his era again for the people that may not know?
Oak was in the 80s and 90s.
80s and 90s.
And I think this generation, is that Generation X?
I don't understand these generations. So
Whatever.
Don't ask me.
But the players in the 80s and 90s seem to be the most delusional. Or maybe we're just at a point where they're getting a microphone and we're hearing from them the most. So I'm 30 years old. Growing up, in order to get information, I remember we had to go to the library and go to the aisle with the encyclopedia and look stuff up. Now, I got a phone, I remember cars, to put the window up in the car, you had to roll. Now you can just press a button.
Well, I had the roll-up car in college.
You did.
Now to park your car, you can see behind the car. So humans are amazing.
On the way he going with this.
With evolution. We're just amazing. We improve on everything.
Okay.
But apparently we don't with basketball. That's just the one thing we haven't figured out. In the 100 years of it being played, basketball, it peaked in the 80s and 90s, and now we just
and it can only be played one way.
Yeah. We just haven't figured it out. The fastest man in the world in the 40s ran times that are being ran by high schoolers now. Strength records, everything has improved. But again, according to Charles Oakley and them, basketball is not included. I'm here to put that to rest in a lot of ways. So let's talk about the game of basketball. Let's talk about how the game of basketball has evolved. And I think we also have to keep that in consideration when we look at stats. Because sometimes we look at stats. I'm going to talk about Wilt. Sometimes we look at stats and we don't put it in its proper context. Now, I think it's important to understand that the younger generation, we cannot disrespect the older generation in the manner that some people do. When they talk about basketball in the 80s and 70s, they were playing against plumbers and, but these were still world-class athletes. Stop it. Let's not act like, Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, those were massive human beings that were very fast, strong, all of that good stuff. However, the rules of the game has determined how the game is played and what is emphasized, what records are in place. So, if you look at the 60s, you look at Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, no one is ever going to top their rebound records. Wilt Chamberlain had a 55 rebound game. Wilt and Bill Russell consistently averaged over 20 rebounds a game.
Yeah, there's a reason for that.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah.
Why do you what?
More shots. People taking shots close to the basket. The rebounds weren't going out as far. People shooting threes, rebounds longer.
You have less guards down in the paint as well. You got more big men back in the day that were actually in the paint
These are good answers. Answers I didn't even have in my
Yeah,
brain,
I saw a video on this the other day.
Yeah. So
The floor is spread out more nowadays compared to than it was back in the day. A lot more compressed.
absolutely. So it's a lot more compressed. We were very rigid in what people's roles were.
Yeah.
Guards don't rebound.
Rebound.
That's
Yeah.
the job of the big man. The big man, inside. However, one thing that's underrated that people don't understand is, one, the pace was really fast in the NBA, 60s and 70s and up into the 80s. The pace was really fast. They actually got up more shots than they get up now. The field goal percentages were really low.
Yeah.
So I went through and I looked at the field goal percentage leader by year, just by the zeros: 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, 2000, 2010. Every 10 years, it went higher. In 1960, the top field goal percentage in the NBA was 46%. It was around 45, 46%. And the pace was faster. So we're getting a lot of shots up, and what's happening? They're missing a lot of shots.
Yeah.
So, yes, Bill Russell was a great rebounder. Yes, Will Chamberlain was a great rebounder. However, again, their records will never be broken because people don't miss as many shots as they did then, and people don't get up as many shots as they did then. So it's important to put that in perspective. Same thing when you talk about Oscar Robertson averaging a triple-double. It was awesome, but it was a fast pace, and there were only 12 teams in the league when he did that.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to understand that when we compare him and Russ or whatever. Now, I do think triple-doubles are easier to get now as well, but I'll talk about why in a second. All right, so the pace was a lot faster back then. We already know there was no three-point line. Eventually, we introduced the three-point line, the shot clock, things along the lines of that. Now we get to the 80s and the 90s. This is where a lot of people say it's the golden era of basketball. This is where basketball hit its peak, and these players nowadays, they can't hang in that era. What's the number one thing we hear? Physicality.
Yeah.
Because apparently physicality means superiority to them. Like it was more physical, so that means it's more superior. And the world-class athletes of 2022 can't adjust to physical basketball. Growing up, did y'all play NBA style basketball or did y'all play physical basketball?
It was like in the middle. We weren't physical. But
I'm from the suburbs.
Yeah.
Okay, so
You don't fight.
I'm from the hood. We played physical basketball.
Now in in streets.
Yeah, in the street. That's what I'm saying. Like
I was a person I never caught fouls. Like if
Right.
you hit me, you just hit me,
Right.
and I'm gonna just continue to play on.
right. And my point is all of these players grow up playing pickup basketball. So they know what physical basketball is.
Yeah.
It's not like they're incapable of adjusting. But again, when people say the physicality equals defense, that's where I think they're totally wrong. And I'm about to explain why now. So, back in the 80s, they had something called the illegal defense rule. It's not the 3-second illegal defense now. It's a legal defense rule, which meant, so say I'm guarding Corey, all right? In order for you to help, you have to do a full committed double team, or you have to stay away. You can't do like now where we have these zones, or when someone, say I catch the ball in the elbow and then someone else is just behind the defender waiting, in no man's land. Like you couldn't do that. That's an underrated change that really changed the whole landscape of basketball because defenses were a lot simpler then. It was either I'm playing my man or it's a double team.
Yeah.
There's not much else to read.
Yeah.
I got to beat my man one-on-one. Yeah, he can hand check me. Okay. But I can deliver as much as as much as I'm taking. So once they made that change. So that's why that rule in itself, I think, discounts a lot of the talk when people say, well, the NBA players couldn't have handled it because it was physical. Yeah, it was physical, but it was a lot of one-on-one. If you look at a lot of Michael Jordan highlights, it's a lot of double team or one-on-one.
Yeah.
You don't see no pick and roll. You don't see Michael Jordan coming off and somebody's waiting for him in the paint. Like, that's not the case. It's I beat my man one-on-one or it's a double team. So let's talk about spacing. It took us maybe 20, 30, 35 years to understand that 3 is more than 2. Like we just
Yeah.
like it probably makes sense to shoot more threes,
Yeah.
right? You can shoot 33% from 3 and shoot 50% from 2 and it equals the same
Yep.
thing. So I think when we're having these discussions, I think it's important to gauge what's actual fact and what's nostalgia. So when the pandemic first hit, I was watching NBA Hardwood Classics like all day long. Because when you watch basketball, I watched a lot of games from when I was growing up. When you watch it now, it's a lot different than you see it through a different lens than when you saw it when you were growing up. So like with a lot of these old geezers, when they're talking about the game, they're going off of what they remember, what they felt. Like, oh, it was so this is that. But when you watch it now, it's a lot different. So, in the 80s and 90s, especially up in the 80s, you watch Magic Johnson, do an entry pass to Kareem. Both of them are inside of the three-point line.
Yeah.
That's how condensed everything was. So, like, the game's more physical. It's a lot more condensed, but it was a lot of fast break. And there was no spacing. You didn't have a lot of ground to cover. It was a very simple game. The game evolved from then. All right, so spacing. So that's huge. We didn't get the zone defense back in the NBA up until the early 2000s. In the 90s, the pace slowed down. We had a lot more ISO. That's when Jordan really started to dominate. That was his time. Now, I've talked about why I think, of course, Jordan, like I said, he's my GOAT. However, I do believe he dominated an era that was watered down. The NBA expanded. We had a lot of expansion teams. There were a lot of teams that you could beat up on, and there were a lot of teams with just one star. But nonetheless, pace slows down. The game is really, really physical in the 90s. Scores are low. Like, whereas in the 70s and 80s, final scores would be 120 to 130. The NBA record game was a triple overtime, 186 to 184. Get to the 90s, final scores are in the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
I think once Shaq entered the league, that changed a lot. I think they implemented zone defenses because Shaq was so unstoppable. Like, we had to have a plan for Shaq. What ended up happening was, in the early 2000s, they allowed the zone defense to be implemented. However, you still had the hand check. The hand check, we know what the hand check is. That's when you put your hand on someone's hip, you control where they go, blase, blase, blah. Scores started to plummet around 2002, 2003, 2004, when you had those Pistons, Pacers games, and the final scores were 87 to 81. Like, games were finishing in the 70s so we had the zone defense, and we had the physicality, and we didn't have the understanding that you should shoot more threes than you are now. So the scores were a lot low. So how did the game evolve from there? I think the Phoenix Suns with Steve Nash had a big part of that. They were heavy pick and roll, and they shot more threes. So what did they do? They spread the floor. The floor started to spread. People didn't know how to guard that. They didn't end up winning a ring, but they did. They were kind of the first step to the evolution of the game being how it is now. So as time goes on, people understand you got to shoot more threes. You got to spread it out. Now everything is a lot of pick and roll based play. And along the way, players, like if you play in the 80s and I watch you play, what am I doing? I'm learning from you, and then I'm going to elevate. I'm going to elevate it from there. So you're like prototype 1, I'm prototype 2. I got to see you play. So like Ja Morant, Russell Westbrook, Derrick Rose, who did they see? They saw Stevie Franchise. They saw Stephon Marbury. Like that first group of athletic scoring point guard. Like that wasn't a thing. I think the world's changing a lot more now too. So that's why people feel the freedom to do more. But so players are just more skilled now. They have a lot more skill. And so when Oak is talking about Giannis wouldn't be able to dominate his era because what do you say? They'd knock him out or whatever.
Yeah.
Like
if he came in the paint, they'll basically foul the mess out of him.
Okay, so Giannis would be a bench player, but Luke Longley was the starter. Greg Ostertag was a starting center in the NBA Finals. Vlade Divac was an all-star.
Hey, my boy Vlade. So, and my question to Oakley would be, are we talking about Giannis like the Greek freak, like his massive, strong ability, are we talking about that Greek freak, or are we just talking about just a regular, just long, lanky Giannis Antetokounmpo? Because I think that makes a difference too. Because if we're talking about the Greek freak, I mean,
but even
now that don't make no sense.
I think he was serious. I think he meant Giannis. But even if you're talking about Giannis's body type, like we haven't seen, because Giannis is like a center and a wing in one.
Yeah.
Like I said, he can guard Joel Embiid and he can guard a point guard and
Yeah.
he can guard Kevin Durant. Like if you take Giannis and LeBron, those two freaks, and you just drop them in the 80s,
They could play.
are you kidding me?
Yeah, they'll be fine.
Are you kidding? Like more than fine. They would lose their mind. Like so, Danny Ainge is gonna guard LeBron James. Like what are we? Dan Marley? Dan Marley guarded Michael Jordan. He gonna guard Giannis Antetokounmpo? Like stop it. Like it just doesn't make sense. Now, again, skill level of players now, the moves, the step back, like that was not the case. We remember when Jordan crossed Iverson. I mean, not Jordan crossed. When Iverson crossed Jordan, right? Like who else was Jordan guarding that had moves like that? Nobody. He was the first of his kind.
Yeah.
Like up until the 70s and 80s, people were still like everything we do now is actually palming. We're carrying the ball.
It's really a carry.
It's all
just not
carrying.
called.
It's not
Yeah.
called, no,
Yeah.
because they allowed it. But I think Magic Johnson was the first one to kind of put his hand up under that thing a little bit. Then we got to the stutters, and now you have the Kyries and the Jamal Crawfords of the world. Like we can't act like. I think players of yesteryear could adjust to some of these moves, but if you're going to say they can adjust to those moves, I'm going to say these players can adjust to the physicality. It just doesn't make sense.
Especially with their physical gifts. Like
they're bigger, they're faster.
You're not beating up on LeBron. I mean, you can try, but you're not. Come on.
And what people try to do it like, I'm sorry.
And I'm not even a LeBron fan, but you're not beating up on
not.
LeBron. I mean, you can, like I said, you can try. But
Players, the gamesmanship of the NBA nowadays can be a little bit annoying. Flopping, arguing with refs. But like some people associate that with being soft. And it's like, nah, they're just trying to win. It's annoying that they're getting away with it. But to think that like LeBron is soft or James Harden, no, they're just doing what they think they need to do to win. Like Chris Paul with the rip through, like he doesn't do that because he's trying to cheat the game. He's trying to win.
Yeah.
I think another thing I've heard quite a bit from older players. So we talk about, they say, the young guys couldn't play in our era. Then they'll say, well, if I played now, this is what if Michael Jordan played now, he'd average 50 points per game. This guy would average 40. So let's talk about why that. Oh, go ahead. You about to say something?
Yeah. I actually kind of believe Jordan.
God. Oh my!
He wouldn't average 50, but he'd be up to 30, almost 40. I think he could.
He averaged 30 in his career.
Yeah, with the free range of movement, I think he can average upward of almost 40, if not over 40. In today's NBA. I mean, I may be crazy, but that's just my belief. In the free range of movement, and a player dominating in his era, dominating the ball, I think he can do that. Coming off of pick and rolls, even playing on the ball or off the ball. Either way.
So this is why that's simply not true. Now, I do think if you look at Jordan's peak, I think it was 86, 87 or 85, 86 when he averaged 37. Like, do I think he could potentially average 40 in today's NBA? I don't think he's averaging more than 40. I think he could approach 40. James Harden was averaging 36. This is why I don't think that's true. One, people do this math and they try to, when the Bulls were averaging 99 points, Jordan was averaging 32 of them or whatever. So he was scoring this percentage of his team's points. So if he played in today's game and they were scoring 120, he would be. That doesn't make sense. Like, because we're talking about human beings. Like, Steph Curry's this year is shooting the second most threes he's ever shot in his career, but he's shooting one of the lowest percentages. So the whole like, oh, well, if they just shoot more, they would maintain the same efficiency doesn't make sense, or maintain the same percentage doesn't make sense to me. So that's one. With the pace being faster now than it was in the 90s, that doesn't mean. So is Jordan going to be taking 10 more shots a game? Like, he was already a high volume scorer.
But the reason I say that, right, because I think LeBron can average 30, if not 40 a game, if he really wanted to. And that's even before, his aging.
Okay, so are you saying if he tried?
Yes, if they
40?
tried.
Okay,
yes,
I agree with that.
Because a lot of times LeBron, we watch games and LeBron just doesn't shoot at all in the first quarter.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
He's trying to get his players involved.
If that's the context, can Jordan come in here and I want to average 40? I think he could. He wouldn't win much. But when people say he would average 40 or 50, I think the reasoning is slightly flawed because, yes, there's freedom of motion, but again, there are more complex defenses that can work to get the ball out of his hands versus in the past. Just my opinion on that. Another thing is, so if we're doing that pseudo math for Jordan, if we're adding 10, 13 points per game to his average, are we going to take 10 points away from players if we put him back in the day? So, like, if Jordan's going from 30 to 40 from 95 to 2022, so if I put Kevin Durant back then, is he averaging 10 points less? Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't really make, like, it's easy to say it, but you got to think where the point's going to come from. Are they going to take more shots? Like, I think with more shots being taken in the NBA, that's more shots for role players. Like, if you look at high volume scores, like, I don't think Jordan's taking 40 shots a game. And if he is, he's missing more because he's tired. So, like, yes, you can say from a physicality standpoint and from freedom of motion, it's kind of easier to score. It's easier to score in that realm, but you also have more complex defenses. And, again, if you're shooting more, if you're a more high-volume scorer, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to score more. So I don't think Michael Jordan would average 50 points in today's NBA. Like, Tracy McGrady tried that. And I like T-Mac. I do. He tried it. He's like, the year when they had the zone defenses put in and the hand check, he averaged 28. And, like, no one else was averaging over 25. Like, everybody's field goal percentage was plummeting. He's like, well, if I average 28 then, I mean, what would I do in today's NBA? LeBron James was drafted in 2003. Like, people are acting like LeBron didn't play in that era. Like, T-Mac's prime was what, 2000 or 2007? Like, LeBron was in the league then averaging 27, 30.
He came out busting.
Right. So, like, LeBron averaged 31 in 05, 06. Kobe was averaging 35. Iverson averaging 33. We had three players averaging over 30 in 05, 06. So, like, where are we getting this from that, like, from 2000 to 2002, you're going to add all these points to people's, per game average?
I think 40 is a more realistic,
I think 40 is more realistic.
Because, I mean, you can even just get, like, 5 of those points from the free throw line, right?
Yeah.
And then that adds on, what, 1 or 2 more made baskets, right?
If you have a super high volume score, you can probably. I think 40 is still really tough.
Yeah, but I
think you can get
to your point though, like you said, you probably wouldn't win much.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't win much. But then, I think if you're around 40 points per game, you're gonna start getting the Steph Curry treatment. Steph Curry gets doubled sometimes as soon as he crosses half court. Yeah. He was getting trapped in the NBA All-Star game.
Yeah, he was.
He made 16 threes. He got to the point where he's getting trapped. So, like, I do think there are more defenses that can, that can scheme to try to get the ball out of your hand. Now, the pick and roll definitely changed the game of basketball for everything. Now, teams, their entire offense is a high pick and roll.
Yeah.
Put somebody in the corner and have them just sit there waiting to catch the three. So, yeah. The game has evolved a lot, and I understand when people say they might not enjoy watching the game as much. I've gone back and watched games for the 90s, and I've had times where I really enjoyed watching this. Nobody, there was less I'm trying to trick the refs in the game then. It was just kind of basketball. That's great. That nostalgia is awesome. But once you start talking about skill, I mean, come on, man. The moves that these guys have are unmatched. Kyrie Irving. I think Kyrie Irving is the most talented player I've ever seen offensively. Talented.
I don't have an argument about that.
Like, I would not build a team around him.
Yeah.
I would not build a team around
He's not
him.
reliable,
He's
but yeah.
he's not a winner.
No, but like what he can do on the basketball court is, and I do think if I put him on the same court with Bob Cousy, come on, man, come on. If I put him on the court, Pete Maravich was nasty, but Pistol Pete, come on, man. So come on, man, old school Unc. If I call you Unc, respect, like for real. But like, stop it, man. Stop it. The game, these players are much more skilled. They're much more talented. It doesn't really compare. We could talk about rules. We could talk about, but physicality does not equal good defense. Steals numbers are lower now than they've ever been. Why? Because you can't put your hands on them. Michael Jordan averaged over 3 steals a game several years. Nobody's going to do that anymore because you can't put your hands on them. I said I'd get back to the triple-double thing. We have more triple-doubles now with guards. Why? Because he was talking about spacing of the floor. Like you have more guards. Now teams are scheming for guards to get the rebound to start the break. Yeah. You know, they're a longer rebound. So, you know, all stats have to be put into context. But Jordan's not averaging 50 today, and Giannis is destroying Greg Ostertag. Stop it, man. Stop. That's it. I'm done. Thank you for joining us on the For the Win Vodcast.
Make sure you follow us on IG at For the Win Vodcast, on YouTube at For the Win, on Apple Music, on Spotify. We are everywhere.
For the win. And we out.
Peace.
Yes, sir.